Good morning and welcome into First Take. We begin with the breaking news. The International Olympic Committee has officially postponed the 2020 Tokyo Olympic Games, pushing them back to the summer of 2021. The Japanese Prime Minister said that he and the IOC president agreed on the postponement, saying, quote, "We have to think about the current outbreak of the coronavirus," end quote. The Tokyo Games are scheduled to be held from July 24th to August 9th. On that note, we bring in our Jeremy Schaap, who has covered many Olympic Games, 8 to be exact. He's wrote a book about the Games in Berlin. Jeremy, great to have you with us this morning.
Thanks, Molly. Thanks for having me.
Jeremy, would love to have your perspective on this. Tell me to your initial reaction here on the postponement.
Well, it was inevitable, right? I mean, the IOC said a couple of days ago that it was going to take up to 4 weeks to announce this decision. But so much pressure was mounting in just the last 36 hours. National Olympic committees from Canada, Australia, the United States, others as well, saying even if they held the games in Tokyo this summer, they were not going to send their athletes, or they probably weren't going to send their athletes. International Track and Field Organization as well, other national governing bodies. It was becoming an untenable position. But the IOC, which is typical of it, takes its time with these things. Perhaps it took a little bit too much time when we're talking about this, because there were athletes out there who were saying they were not going to participate. They resented being in this kind of limbo at a time when, if the Olympics were going to take place, they would have to be training, perhaps in unsafe conditions in many parts of the world where social distancing is now the norm, if not the law. This was going to happen. It was inevitable there would be a postponement. The IOC just needed a push the last couple of days.
Jeremy, I appreciate you being on the show as always, buddy. Thank you so much. Let me ask you this question. For those out there that were wondering what the hell took the IOC, the Olympics Committee, so long to make this decision, could you explain to our audience what that was? Because when you consider the fact that social distancing obviously became a priority because of the coronavirus, not only that, drug testing and how that would have been compromised and what have you, it seemed like this should have been a much easier decision that was made much earlier. Explain the delay.
Well, remember, you're right, Stephen A., but this is the way the IOC has typically always worked. Its inclination, it's in its DNA, is for the games to go on. That is what has always happened, with the exceptions of World Wars I and II, when the games were canceled in 1916, 1940, and 1944. And so, they knew the pressure was building. They made an announcement not that long ago, several weeks ago, while this crisis was already ramping up and raging in some parts of the world, that they would not cancel or postpone the Olympics. Of course, like many other organizations, like many other sports bodies, they had to backtrack from that, and they had to assess the situation as it is rather than the way they want it to be. And once you had Canada and Australia and the U.S. saying, all right, Thomas Bach, you can have your Olympics in Tokyo this summer, but we're not sending our athletes, who are up in arms about this, who do not want to be in a position right now where they have to think about training, and they have to think about, how would that even work in so many sports? You can't train in isolation, which is what so many people, millions upon millions of people, have to do right now. So they got the push, they got the message, they relented. And of course, Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, doesn't want thousands upon thousands of people coming to Japan this summer and perhaps spreading the virus, perhaps catching it among themselves, then going home to other places and continuing to spread it. So the risks were too great, but as they often do, as they figure out the financial implications and so forth, and consult with their sponsors and with their rights-holding partners, it took some more time.
So, Jeremy, I guess the disconnect for me when I hear this, a lot of people will talk about tone deafness. It was Mark Emmert, the same thing with the NCAA. But there's a difference between tone deafness and simple, logical progression of thought. In other words, whatever your short-term financial interests are, any child who you explain this to would see that, well, as soon as it's explained in simple terms, well, then that will have to be canceled. So it occurs to me that it's simply people like Mark Emmert, the NCAA, people in the IOC. You want to wait till the last possible moment to cancel because of just the financial implications. For logistics aside, there's so much money on the line that even if you think it's unlikely, you're not going to say it's off until you absolutely have to. Then it becomes a PR nightmare, though, because it seems like everyone knew this was inevitable. Am I right about that? Is it simply a financial calculation? Hey, let's put this off until we absolutely have to?
I think that's a large part of it. Obviously, they were waiting, perhaps hoping against hope that there would be some kind of an indication that this was going to trend away from where it seems to be trending now. But as we've said, that became untenable. And as I mentioned, Max, it's in the DNA of not just the IOC, but certainly the IOC, but many sports organizations. The instinct, the default position is we're going to go on. The games are going to go on. And it's not analogous to this situation because we're dealing with a pandemic now, something unlike we've dealt with in modern history. But remember the IOC after the slaughter in Munich in 1972, 11 members of the Israeli delegation murdered, a German policeman murdered by the Black September terrorist organization. They halted the games for a day, and then they went on because that's what the IOC says it must do. The games must go on. Again, this is a very different situation, and we're talking about people being endangered, perhaps hundreds of thousands or millions of people endangered by the games merely going on. But they did take their time, and they did receive a lot of criticism and pushback, and this is where we are.
But clearly they've made the right decision, even if it was a bit late. Jeremy, thank you so much for that context and perspective this morning. We always appreciate having you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Stephen A., I want to bring you in here, guys. I want to get your take on this. And obviously, it's a unique situation here. We're used to covering the NBA, the NFL. They get a chance every year to compete. These athletes, it's every 4 years. It can have a different type of effect. Stephen A., where are you on this late decision by the IOC?
Well, I think they dragged their feet a little bit too long, but nevertheless, even though they came late to the situation, they're here. And the reality is, it was the right decision. There should not have been a delay. This decision should have been made, to be quite honest with you, at least a week ago, or at least around the time that the NBA and the NHL had suspended their play, that Major League Baseball has suspended its play. Here's the reality of the situation: you have individuals, athletes that have been training for years upon years for this moment. So what happens? The Olympic Games hadn't been canceled. They're sitting up there flying in the wind. I don't think the IOC realizes that by delaying this decision, you may have jeopardized even more individuals, because you knew that those athletes, suspecting that the games may indeed continue, definitely had to be ready, which means that the level of safety in terms of social distancing that you were asking the world to practice, they were unable to do so because they had to go out there and train and to make sure that they didn't dip in terms of their preparation in any way. So you were jeopardizing those athletes by not suspending these games. You were jeopardizing them by putting them in a position where they felt compelled to continue to train and what have you. And by doing that to them, you may have endangered even more people throughout this world because of your ill-advised decision to delay making this very decision that you should have made. So it's inexcusable. It's unfortunate that they took this long, but thank God they finally reached this conclusion, because I spoke to a couple of Olympians, and they swore up and down this was the decision that they wanted. It was the right decision. It was just a bit late.
The IOC gets zero credit from me for making any decision, because they didn't make a decision except for the wrong one. There was a chance to make a decision with everything you just laid out, Stephen A. There was a chance. So, Molly, Stephen A., when people say things in the media like, well, they finally came to this. No, the time is the whole thing. When you make the call is the decision. You know who gets credit for coming to the right decision? Adam Silver. Adam Silver, he was decisive. He did, when it became obvious what the inevitable would be, he made the call. He gets credit, not Mark Emmert. The NCAA didn't do a damn thing. They canceled the games. No, they had no choice. The IOC here had no choice. So they made no decision other than postponing making the decision. That's the choice they made. They deserve and receive from me at this moment precisely zero credit.
And let me say this also.
Fair enough.
Remember, there's not a cancellation that took place here, guys. It's a postponement, a suspension.
Yes.
A year later, the same kind of dollars you were anticipating that were coming to you this summer, it's simply coming next summer. That's all. Meanwhile, the athletes themselves get to practice safety in terms of social distancing. They get to be around their family and loved ones without worrying about jeopardizing them, we hope. And you still buy yourself an additional year to prepare for those games. So therefore, we expect them to be even more prepared than they may have been already, not to mention the fact that they'll be safer and nobody's losing any opportunities. It's just being delayed because the world is on pause right now. It's not like somebody is gaining an unfair advantage. There is no unfair advantage here. Everybody is suffering during the same situation. And as long as that's the case and the money's not being lost, everything will be fine eventually.
No question. And Stephen A., in terms of the athlete perspective, we'll have Carly Lloyd later in the show. Lolo Jones will join us. We're also going to have Emmanuel Sanders to talk some NFL. Mel Kiper will be here. So we've got a lot coming up here on First Take. Obviously, we wanted to deal with the breaking news right out of the gate, though. When we come back, we've got some NFL news to handle with you all. The Hall of Famer, Terry Bradshaw, had some really strong comments on Tom Brady. Was he throwing shade? We'll fill you in and dive into that. And where will Tua land in the draft? Our guy, the guru, Mel Kiper Jr. will be here. First Take, just getting started. Stay tuned.